brought to you almost live from the Dude in the Basement Studios. Why? Because that's where the good stuff is. It's Sips, Suds, and Smokes with your smoking hosts, the good old boys. Suds, Suds, Suds. It's time for more Suds.
Hello and welcome to this Suds episode where everything good in life is worth discussing. On today's segment, we have a lot of hosts that are going to be joining me. Here at the table is Reverend Mark.
Hello and good afternoon.
Good old gal Julieanna.
Aye, mateys.
That's the most unique one. This is not our day. Anyway. Good old gal, good old boy Dave. Hang on, I need to start this over again. This is the worst start.
Hey y'all, this is good old gal Dave.
This is good old gal Dave.
How you been?
Just so pathetic. Somebody hand me another beer. That's what I need.
No doubt.
Or two.
Definitely on this show, we've had a lot of beer to consume. Definitely on this episode. On this segment, on our Suds segment, we talk about beer, definitely more beer. On this particular segment, it is a beer style episode. This is part 2 of a two-part episode where we were talking about double IPAs and Imperial IPAs. We have tasted 23 beers in a double blind tasting. That means that we had no idea what we were tasting, what was in the glass. It was frankly just a bunch of glasses and a bunch of numbers.
We didn't even know it was beer in them until we drank it.
I think you knew that because I said hoppy, sweet. That's what I wrote down about 400 times, on my sheet for sure. Now, IPA in general is one of the most popular styles in the U.S. right now. There are well over 4,000 beers in this category in the U.S. being commercially made right now. Now, double IPAs and Imperial IPAs are basically cousins of IPAs in general. They're usually versions where the gravity or the amount of sugar or alcohol is much higher. And so in many cases, that really brings about a certain measure of complex flavors to the occasions. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And it actually has created a bit of some stylizing based on regions. So you have West Coast style IPAs and you have East Coast style IPAs that have kind of come into the mix as well. Now, as we're going through our discussion today, we are going to be rating our beers, and telling us about that is going to be good old boy Dave.
Hey, thanks, Mike. We'll be tasting and discussing these beers using the Suds ratings, patent pending, and our signature belching sounds. Here are those ratings now. Number 1, that sucks. Give me anything but a bud. Number 2, was that a belch? That was a belch. Number 3, what a relief. Number 4, a body should really not make that sound. And number 5, listen to that hang time, give me another.
Thanks, Dave, for going through our Suds ratings here on Sip, Suds, and Smokes. We will be using those ratings definitely as we go along, talking about all 23 of these beers that we're going to go through. So like I mentioned, we have put a real twist on this particular show. We have gone through 23 different beers. We have tasted these beers in a double blind tasting. That means we have no idea exactly what we're tasting. Dave's still questionable if it's beer. Dave's still questionable, period.
Actually, it's pee-pee.
But this is a very typical experience for many of us because we do a lot of beer contest judging, and we end up doing a blind tasting like this for beer competitions as well. So this was right on par for many of us that do this quite often. So here is a list of the beers that we are going to discuss today. All 23. Green Flash, West Coast IPA, 21st Amendment Hop Crisis, Dogfish Head 90-minute IPA, Cathedral Squares, St. Lenny's, Odell Brewing's Mercenary, Belching Beaver Brewery Damned.
That is quite the mouthful.
Please don't
No pun
snicker it.
intended.
Firestone Walker's Double Jack, Blackstone Brewery Enabler. I'll talk a little bit about the story behind that in this episode. Oscar Blues Gubna, Sixpoint Craft Ales Resin, Sixpoint Craft Ales High Res, Moylan Hopsicle, New Belgian Rampant, Stouts Double IPA, Stone Ruination, Founders Double Trouble, Three Floyds Apocalypse Cow, Hair of the Dog, the Blue Dot version, Southern Tier 2X IPA, Lagunitas Maximus, Foothills Brewing Sing Double IPA, and Great Divide Hercules Double API, and the last one is Founders Devil Dancer is the last one that we're going through in this episode. So a very long list indeed. A lot of really great beers to celebrate here. So I'll explain a little bit about this particular show. A little bit different than maybe some of the other episodes we're doing. This is what we'll call the backside of our discussion about this blind taste testing. This is part 2, two-part discussion.
I love discussing the backside.
I just knew it. It just was going to happen right before we knew it. So most of us are going to be talking about a broad range of topics. Julieanna is going to go through her 14 honorable mentions that are in
At
this.
least.
Because there are no losers in this contest. We actually have brought in a lot of the beer into our studio here for us to enjoy through this taste testing. So if you happen to hear some of us get up and move around in the middle of this, it's just because we're pouring some of the beer that we can actually talk about, because it's kind of tough to keep 23 cups in front of you at the same time. So a little bit of a physical kind of juggle going on here in the studio at the same time. So we definitely have some topics for us to talk about through this second episode of this blind taste testing. So the first thing we kind of wanted to talk about was what was outside our top 3. There are a lot of things that are kind of number 4, 5, and 6 there. There's a story to be told about maybe some of the other things that were in our rating, and I'm just kind of curious what else was on your list that might be number 4 or 5 that you didn't get to talk about that you wanted to talk about. So up first, at least through this question, is going to be Reverend Mark, if he's ready.
I'm ready. I'm always ready.
Otherwise, we'll skip to the first 6 honorable mentions from Julieanna's list.
Okay. Yeah. No, I have several honorable mentions, and there were a constellation of 4 or 5 that were vying for the top 3, just didn't quite make it. One that I really liked, but I felt as though it was just a slightly bit off style, as I understand, Imperial or Double IPA, was the Cathedral Square St. Lenny's. I really liked it a lot. It was very malt forward. It had a very hearty kind of hop balance, but it was somewhat subdued nonetheless for as big a beer as it was. Almost a malt monster, and it was very creamy and smooth, and so actually this one is a Belgian style IPA. So that kind of explains it to me now, as I went back and looked at it.
Huh. Now, this particular brewery is not a brewery that I have had a lot from. I know that. I know I picked up this bottle in St. Louis. Julieanna, is this a brewery that you know a little bit about? And is this a fairly typical style from Cathedral?
Well, what's interesting about this logo is that, about this label, is that it's got Schmaltz Brewing and Cathedral Square. So it's a collaboration. Which makes me understand it even more. Because it's a Belgian rye double IPA. That's, I mean, because this was in my honorable mention, which I'll get into the whole scheme of my honorable mentions later. But in general.
I feel like I'm going to have to take a new math class.
You probably will. So, Cathedral Square, I like a lot. I mean, their beer is very reasonably priced, and they're good, light, traditional Belgian-y style beers. I mean, there was a Belgian agave beer that I had from them about a year ago, and I was like, oh my god, this is great. And then since then I've gone and gotten more and more bottles of their stuff because for the price point, it's very reasonable. They're very underrated, I think, for what they are in the St. Louis area. And from what I remember, you can only get them in the St. Louis area. It's a very small distribution.
Oh.
But the Wine and Cheese place had a decent amount of them, and that's where
this is from,
and that's where I got them from. So this is a bit of a stretch, but for what it is, I really liked it. It just was one of those that was a little odd, but
it was, and that's why I didn't get my top 3.
Exactly.
I thought it was amazing, but it just didn't seem to fit the style parameters that we were specifically considering.
So what's your Suds rating on the Cathedral Square?
I actually gave it a 4.
Huh.
Yeah, just an overall rating.
And I think the fact that this is a Belgian style probably explains a little bit about why it might stand out in the crowd, and certainly the fact that it's a rye based. That would be a combination of some flavoring characteristics that would be very different than everything else. So I can understand where that would kind of stand out, in the scheme of things. My notes around Cathedral Square were pretty simple. I wrote down sweet, and I put down a 3. That was about it. So,
well, and it really doesn't align with what we're talking about today.
Definitely not was not hoppy, because the word hoppy is not anywhere on my line.
Yeah. So I held it back on a top 3 because it didn't make the style description, but I still gave it a 4 because I thought it was a great beer.
Well, I noticed while we were talking here, I mean, the two of you actually poured, another tasting sample. I mean, do you really think that, is it closer to resembling what's on the label now that actually what it's been declared as, that it kind of makes sense? You're not looking at it in a comparative light. Now you're comparing it. They said it's a rye forward, Belgian IPA. From that perspective.
Yeah, and to me, since I poured another cup and it's fresh and it's cold, oh, heck yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is Belgian-y. And the thing is, okay, granted this was number 4, but this was after it was poured for a few minutes, and by the time I got to it, it just had this, something different with all of the Double and Imperials that we were tasting. Right. It just seemed a little out of the mix. But yet, as we go forward, IPAs are not your regular IPAs anymore.
No, definitely.
And neither are doubles and Imperials. So, I give them props for taking a Belgian-style ale, which is, just another country's version of a pale ale, so to speak, and then just, ramping it up. So why not?
So, I know that you have several honorable mentions to get to, and I think what we'll do is we'll talk. We'll
but
go
that's
back to
another
one of yours,
show.
and that's another episode all by itself, because nobody's a loser here at the House of Julieanna.
Everyone gets a trophy.
Yes,
just different styles of trophies.
Yes, nobody's a loser. You're just not the most. You're just not the winner.
Nobody's a winner. Nobody's a loser.
Oh, whatever. No, the thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of honorable mentions was number 16 and number 18 stood out to me, but for completely different reasons.
Oh, what about 14, 17, 19?
Well, first off,
I actually talked about 14 and 17, so there.
So let's tell everybody what beers we're talking about.
Right. So number 16 was Founder's Double Trouble, which Dave, in a previous episode, has rated as one of his top 3s. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was the Hair of the Dog Blue Dot, which was, surprising to many people, thinking that it was going to be high on their list, which actually wasn't. And both of you are tasting it out of big-ass cups. That's impressive. Okay. So the point that I was trying to make here was these two were not typical, because to me, in terms of my tasting notes, they were very forward in one specific or two specific flavors, and that to me threw it off from what I would consider a traditional double IPA. But I'm not saying that they're bad. Like, for instance, the Founder's Double Trouble was very grapefruit to me. I mean, my first tasting note was big ass grapefruit. Pardon my French. So yay, it's, if you love a very grapefruit hop bomby flavor, well then this beer is for you, because it is very grapefruit flavored. And then for the Hair of the Dog, I got a lot of pineapple and mango, and it was very predominant in the pineapple mango, and I thought, well, that's a little odd, but yet for what it is, it's really good. I just couldn't rate that as a top 3 for me because it didn't consist as a traditional double IPA. But yet the profile of what a double IPA and an Imperial IPA is changing, as we will discuss in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Right, and if we'd have thought it had been inoculated with Conan yeast,
Right.
then it would have made sense.
Sure, exactly.
Well, so it's interesting you picked up on one beer that, both Reverend Mark and I had a lot of high hopes for Hair of the Dog, the Blue Dot. This is a beer that's been very well rated. A lot of industry, has a lot of hype around this. But this is the first time I've had it, and I think it's the first time you've had it as well, Reverend Mark.
First time I've had it out of a bottle. I actually had it on tap in Washington State. Yeah.
Well, so we actually went back and grabbed the bottle, at break, and poured ourselves another, glass, because we're like, what the heck, is going on? Because for that many people to rave about this, for us to be, off, what's off? So I can understand in this particular rating why this hit where it did on, for me. My tasting notes around Hair of the Dog Blue Dot were, it was tasty, it was very well balanced, but I gave it a 3. And, it's very West Coast. It's a bit citrus forward for me. I don't know about you. How about you, Reverend Mark? I mean, where would you put this?
Actually, I am so surprised. I gave it a 2. This is the big disappointment of the day for me.
Wow, that's too bad. So I mean, it's interesting, the contrast, and this is what I always love about double blind tastings is it definitely it'll true you up faster than you ever thought. Yeah. And if you think that the beer that you're drinking is hanging so tough all the day long, I don't know, if you're spending $4,000 or $5,000 on beer every year, you want to sit down and actually do a double blind tasting of that beer to actually make sure it's worthy of your palate. Because I have to say, it'd be pretty tough for me to go back and probably put that beer back on in my list. So even after everything we've gone through here today, which is very interesting, because it's definitely a beer that I went in. I went into this thinking, I think those 3 or 4 might do really, really well, and this was one of those ones. So I'm glad you mentioned it kind of earlier in our discussion.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think if nothing else, this really speaks highly for the beer stores that do the build your own 6-pack, where you can do 6 individual beers, so you could actually do your own flight.
Yeah, you don't have to do 23 like we did.
Yeah, no, please don't do 23.
But that would be a case of beer, wouldn't it, if you could...
Please don't remind me how much beer I've had today.
Get 3 or 4 friends, do 4 6-packs of a style and knock it out and see what everybody really likes. I think this is really a good thing to do, because we all, I think, sometimes fall prey to...
I think I know, but I really don't know.
Yeah, and we fall prey to a brand name. Or, I think this brand name stinks because everybody says it stinks. Or, I think this brand name is awesome because everybody says it's awesome.
If you had ever told me that we were going to have a skunk beer of Stone, I would have never have believed you in a million years. Yep. But yeah, here we are. I still can't believe that happened. So.
I know.
And, if you were going to tell me that all three of you were going to disagree with me about beers that were good, I would have been like, what?
Okay, but I wonder if part of it is there were some West Coast IPAs that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I rated them so bad. Like the Green Flash, for instance. I mean, the Green Flash and the Firestone are a standard in the scheme of things.
I know, and so that's what I liked about this lineup is it was a combination of things that you've had a dozen times.
Exactly.
And you know exactly where this is and where it should be, and where it should be, in your lineup of palate, stacked up with some things that were kind of on the fringe,
Right.
outside of that.
Right.
Sure.
Outside of that top 20, and so there were some things that frankly kind of lined up exactly where I thought they would be, as well. But yeah, you're right. There were some diehard standards that we definitely threw in here. So I thought it was interesting that a lot of us did not pick those in our top three. And you're right.
Yeah.
For nobody to name the Green Flash, West Coast IPA in their top three, I thought that was interesting.
Or the 6-point resin.
True.
Yeah.
Well, you named the high res, I think.
No,
or
he
somebody
did the high res, but yeah.
Well, my biggest surprise of all of these that I didn't put in the top three as I look at what was available to us today was the Odell Mercenary.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said for years that is like one of my very favorite double IPAs, and it didn't make the cut today.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I even got I'll even fess up on my own tasting notes that I actually wrote down as very West Coast. I thought that was the resin.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I really got the two confused. Actually, my Suds rating was a 4 for the Odell Mercenary, and it's a beer I've had with you. It's a beer I've had, in general, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I thought it would have, been a really good candidate for being in my top three as well. I was really shocked, at that Foothills, slipping in like it did. And I went back and tasted it at the break, kind of like, what was I thinking? I'm thinking that's a really good beer.
Right,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
That's exactly. I'm like, okay, I'm sticking with it. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but it's a really great beer. There's absolutely everything we talked about with that beer is definitely there. So,
But I think, when we talked about it before, is that we all had a lot of threes and we all had a lot of fours in this flight. So,
yeah.
A lot of times you're deciding between two beers and it's a very close margin. What is your number three versus what is your number four?
Well, right now my margin is that we need to take a segment break.
Do it.
And we'll be right back in just a bit. Hey, thanks for coming back and joining us. We are talking about double IPAs and Imperial IPAs and a double blind taste testing we've had of over 23 beers. We're going through Julieanna's honorable mentions at this moment. So we got to like half of one.
Number 153.
Oh, whatever.
All right. So it was good we talked about Hair of the Dog, but what else is on your list there?
Well, no, I think I've actually gone through them. I mean,
No way.
No, seriously. Because I was surprised about Odell's Mercenary myself and how it ended up being a little bit more West Coast than I remember it being.
Yep.
In terms of flavor. But that brings me to a very interesting point, and maybe we can all talk about this, is what the progression is of the IPA and the double IPA. It used to be that we were limited in the types of hops that we had in brewing these double IPAs, but now like the floodgates are open and we have all of these flavors, which is why I was going into those honorable mentions, because it is not a traditional double IPA to me, but yet if you are into those citrus flavors or those mango, pineapple, Conan flavors, well, then you're going to like one particular beer over another just based on that itself. Maybe not the full spectrum of what the beer is like, but just that particular component of it. Which blows me away, because I like resin like Dave likes resin.
Yep.
But yet resin didn't do well to me, in comparison to Apocalypse Cow. Man, I could drink that Apocalypse Cow all day long.
Yeah.
As well as the Foothills like you were talking about.
Yeah.
But yet, now that I know that the Cathedral is a Belgian rye, I'm like, oh my God, this completely changes the landscape for me of what a double IPA can be.
Right.
Let's. So I definitely want to pick up that exact question in just a second, but I want to give Dave and I a chance to go through what else was on, kind of on the back bottom half of our list, after 3 or 4 or anything that was it was right there, it was almost, that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, well, like she just mentioned, Resin from Sixpoint.
Yeah.
Mark had really liked the high res, and you and I both felt that it was maybe a bit too sweet.
Yeah.
I love Resin. I've gone to Kentucky to get it. I've gone actually to Brooklyn to get it, and I really enjoy drinking it. But for some reason today, I gave it a good score. I won't say yet, so you don't hit the button. But it didn't make my top 3. I gave it a 4.
Wow.
So it's one of those things, like I was saying, that when you're giving out a lot of 3s, a lot of 4s, you're tasting a lot of really good IPAs, double IPAs, whatever it is. A lot of times it can come down to how that particular bottle or can arrive to you. Did Mike shake it up in the parking lot before he brought it up, or
yes.
Did Julieanna drop it when she at the store and then go ahead
2 or
and
3
buy
times?
Was it found in the wreckage of the Titanic?
Right.
Exactly.
Did someone castrate a sheep and then leave it?
Somehow, I'm not quite sure how we transcend episodes with one topic, but Dave has managed to do it. Somehow, we are still castrating sheep in this episode.
That's what we call a callback. So, maybe you bought it and you left it in the back of your car on a hot summer day for a few hours, and it got a little bit too high in temperature before you got it. You never know. Beer is very fragile in a lot of respects. When you're making it, it's actually pretty forgiving, but once it's packaged, it's pretty fragile. But I do think resin is something that everyone should really try to get. Another one is the...
Now you're going to say your Suds rating on resin.
I said 4, dude.
Oh, you did?
You already did before.
I did. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Lost track of things.
I thought somebody was keeping up with this.
Those double IPAs have a tendency to do that.
What were we talking about? Sheep castration again.
You're so easily distracted.
All right. What else is on the honorable mention list here for you?
The one other beer that I would like to mention is the Southern Tier 2X IPA. I gave that a 4. Good. And again, I go back to what I like, a good, even, not super bitter, not crazy malty, just right down the road, middle IPA.
I have one more honorable mention.
Sure.
And I actually had 2, but one's already been brought up, so I won't repeat that. But to me, I couldn't believe, but it didn't quite make the cut for me, was the Oscar Blues Gubna.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that myself. So
I just thought it was incredible. It's interesting that the largest percentage of the top like 6-7 beers that I chose, maybe 4 of them I'm thinking now
We're in a can.
were in a can.
Yeah.
And I really like this beer. It maybe it was a little just out of style from what I was thinking at the moment when I was drinking it, but I've come back and revisited it. And, I've looked into the grain bill on it since, and it's a combination of American two-row, dark Munich, and rye. Got a lot of Summit hops, at least on the front end, and then a lot of citrus hops in the dry hop and in the finishing. I just would highly recommend it, and Oscar Blues can't do really anything wrong. So
True.
What's your Suds rating on that?
I gave it a 4.
A 4.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd love to chime in on that same thing, because that was one of the beers that I wanted to mention here as well. That was probably in my top 5 or 6. My tasting notes around Oscar Blues Gubna was pleasant, non-invasive, and it had this kind of hint of sweet. And in kind of the wake of things, I mean, it just felt like such a full-on assault, of your palate for me to basically write pleasant and non-invasive, around something that's labeled as an Imperial IPA. That kind of said, a little bit. Julieanna is actually tasting it once again right now, and I'm curious, what you're thinking.
Yeah, and again, okay, this opens up the whole what is a traditional double IPA now, because it's got the rye in it. And that's what, prompted me before to not put it in my top 3, because I was tasting this, and it was the rye. And granted, I like rye, but for me being a traditional, looking for the traditional double IPA, it didn't fit the mold.
Right.
But now that I'm drinking it again, I'm like, well, heck yeah, why wouldn't I like this?
Yeah. Well, I didn't offer up my Suds rating, which is actually a 4 behind the Oscar Blues Gubner. And, I think, going back to, a prior conversation we had, which is, so Dale's IPA is their traditional pale ale that they sell. Is this basically the hop monster of a Dale's? IPA is the Gubner. To answer my own question rather quickly, no.
Right.
It's not.
No, this is
different. This is very different.
Yeah.
This is one thing where this is not the cousin,
Sure.
This is not the elder cousin of the same thing.
No, this is a completely different
beer.
relative. Yeah.
So,
but this is what I like.
Cousin.
Yeah. No, but this is what I like, is that they're not being traditional and saying, okay, I have a really good IPA, let me just up the ABV, and make it Imperial or double. No, this is like a completely different animal, because it tastes completely different. And the more that I'm thinking about it, this is, I could enjoy this, but it's just not inside the traditional mold.
I think what's amazing is I'm sitting here talking about, there are 3 or 4 beers that are within a quarter mile of each other. I mean, literally. I mean, you could stand in the middle and throw a rock at Oscar Blues, New Belgium, and Odell's, all at the same time out of Fort Collins. And the stark contrast, between, each of these breweries that all have access to the same ingredients, same personnel, not necessarily the same equipment, but
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really great that there is some variation, in those products as well. But definitely something that, I wanted to mention to say, yeah, that's kind of right there. When I had to look at all the things I had 4 and 5s on, we've not talked about that one. And I didn't realize it had rye in it, but I can understand why that kind of rounds out, a bit of the flavoring component around it as well. Let's see, is there anything else on my list of 4s and 5s that we have not chatted around in great clarity? We haven't talked about the Founders Devil Dancer, which was, here in the mix. So this is a seasonal IPA that's released as a double IPA, and I guess the tasting notes I wrote around this it was very roasty. There was a layered effect of the Devil Dancer that's kind of there. As opposed to this full onslaught, palate invasion, that you would have, that roasty quality kind of crept up on you. It was very different than a lot of other things we had today. My Suds rating actually was a 4 for the Devil Dancer. I'm curious what you guys thought, and how was this in your mix?
Well, for me, I have a similar line of thinking. I enjoyed it, but yet it was a little bit too roasty for me. So I thought it was really outside the traditional mix of what a double IPA is. Yeah. And although I liked it a lot because, I love smoky scotches and really heavy barrel-aged whiskeys, that kind of thing. I just thought that it wasn't the traditional double Imperial IPA, so I really couldn't, put it in my top 3. But as something that's a little bit different and outside of the box, it's a really great beer.
Yeah. Well, it was really great to kind of throw that in the mix. It was something that was just recently released. And so there was.
And thank you to Founders for coming to Tennessee, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, there was definitely, the thought about throwing something like that in that was rather fresh into the mix, I thought would be kind of interesting to see everybody's reaction to that. So there's one beer here that I wanted to mention a little around the story that I have to say I had some really high hopes around it. And part of it is who they are, our affinity for that brewery, and the story behind it, which is Blackstone's Enabler. This is a very regional release beer, and I can't begin to tell you how regional it is. It's literally, it is part of a series called The Blacklist, where they're only releasing these beers to literally 6 places. And, I've noticed a trend with breweries that are doing something where they're really are establishing very good relationships with distributors, and definitely with their end points of distribution, bars, growler fills, these places that they really have to rely upon to help sell and move their products, to try and make sure they maintain a good relationship with a very tight-knit, network. The Blacklist is a collection of growler fill restaurants, and I think there's a couple of just pure bars that are in the mix as well. So Enabler is the first in the Blacklist series, and it was just released a couple weeks ago. And my first reaction when I heard about this was, okay, well, in fact, the question that I threw out was, what's so different about this? And Blackstone makes an Imperial IPA called Atom Bomb. And so
and we all like it.
And my first reaction was, so is this basically just nothing more than a growler version of Atom Bomb? Is it the same hop profile or something completely different? And the answer that I got back was, this is something different. And so I picked this up, and I had some high expectations for a couple of reasons. One is that it was fresh. The other is that I knew the story behind it, and I thought, this is going to be a hot profile that really may skew a bit of our influence in thinking about how things are. And yet none of us put this in the top 3, even in our honorable mention. Actually, my tasting notes for the Enabler were, it was bitter, it was hoppy, and I actually rated it as a 3. But this is a brewery that all of us know extremely well, and I'm curious, what went wrong? What would you tell the brewer to go back? If you're looking at the entire wake of things that we've tasted today, what went right or wrong with this beer?
Yeah, my tasting notes indicate that I felt it was a little vegetal. But other than that, The hop balance is good. There was just something about it that tasted a little bit too organic to me. I love Blackstone. I mean, hands down, one of my top 2 or 3 breweries in Nashville. And I agree, the Atom Bomb is wonderful. It's actually on tap right now at their brew house. So I don't know. Maybe this was just not a good introduction.
That was my local twist to this exercise. Any other reaction, David Julieanna?
Yeah, there just was something about it. I mean, I wanted to like it so much because as soon as I, saw what it was, I'm like, oh my God, why did I rate it so badly? But yet, they're just... As he's tasting,
that's something else that's good.
That's pretty good, though.
It is. There just was this weird quality, and I guess it is vegetative, that just was, almost pungent and didn't do well with the hop flavor. I don't know.
Well,
but I rated it like a 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that? Very interesting. Well, they do produce really great beer, and I'm sorry this definitely didn't hit the mark for us today. Some really tough competition here at the table. So, listen, we're going to take another quick break here. We'll be right back, and we'll talk more about what was at the bottom and why was it there. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Sip, Suds, and Smokes. Today's Suds episode is talking about double IPAs and Imperial IPAs and a double blind tasting of over 23 different beers. This is part 2 of our two-part episode on our discussion. And picking up our discussion is, a question that I, wanted to throw back to all of you, which is, so there were several things that were kind of at the bottom. I'm looking at my own list here, and there are a lot of 2s on my list, and some things I'm kind of surprised that are actually at the bottom. And what are some things that you're looking at going, wow, I'm really shocked that was as low as it was? Really?
Well,
other than the Stoner Nation,
yeah.
So let's throw that.
Or the hair of the dog. It was lower than I would have thought.
That's true.
The Moylan Hopsicle.
Yeah, me too.
Very true.
Yeah. Me too.
That was something I rated rather low.
I rated it as a 3, but like a kind of a low 3. Yeah. I just I guess it was sort of in the middle of the flight, and it got lost amongst everything. So as you're going through these things, when you're doing a flight like this, especially if it doesn't stand out like right away, then you just sort of kind of brush it to the side. And I think that's what happened to this beer with me.
Well, so it's an interesting observation that I have, even looking at my own tasting sheet, that when I look at the things that are in my top 3, they're within the top 10 beers that I tried in the entire flight.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that says something about just the element of palate fatigue. That we were all kind of fighting through with so many hoppy beers through here, that those things that were very early on, had the ability of doing well, if they were well. So.
Yeah. I even thought about, what if at some point about doing an exercise, but, like taking everyone's top 5 or 10 and then breaking it up and serving them in different orders each time to see if your ratings would change, because once you've had that first big hop bomb, you can drink water, you can eat crackers or whatever, but it's still going to impact your palate for quite a while.
Yeah.
So seeing how that kind of thing would change, just serving things in a different order might change how you rate them.
Well, and I don't, I was watching us as we went through this, that I don't think that all of us went through about this the same method. I mean, I didn't start at number 1. I think I started at like 16.
Yeah.
And worked my way around. Some of that was intentional to provide some balance. Because I was just curious about this very topic, that we're talking about right now. Even with that said, Moylan was at the bottom for me. It was a 2. My rating was very simple. It was just too bitter.
Yeah.
Now, I will say the one thing I knew about that particular beer is that's a live ale beer. And it actually needs to be stored, refrigerated, transfer refrigerated. When I picked it up, it was off the shelf. It was not refrigerated. So I wonder if something happened with that. It's kind of unusual, that something like that would happen. But anyway, if there's an out for them, that's it, as far as I'm concerned. Anything else at the bottom, and you're like, man, I can't believe that did not do well.
Well, I had one at the bottom, and I had never had it before, so I can't say I feel particularly bad about my rating here. But I guess the one that scored the lowest for me, or near the lowest, was Belching Beaver Brewery Dam.
Dude, okay.
It's funny that you're talking about it, because I pulled the bottle out because I was trying to figure out what it was that made it so bad. I mean, come on,
and I didn't even know the name of it
because Dave likes the name.
Right. But I mean, it's called Belching Beaver
Castrating Brewery.
Castrated hogs.
No, damned double IPA. Okay. But here's they talk about it having crushed grapes, bright citrus, passion fruit, and grapefruit.
And
okay, I'm sorry.
And a pear tree.
Right. Isn't that a little overkill?
I think there's some labeling problem.
I put down there, I said, too much. It seemed like too much Chinook. I don't like Chinook hops when they kind of bleed over into the rest of the beer. So I said, Houston, something's wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
So what's your Suds rating?
It was a 2.
A 2.
Yeah.
Well, to at least offer some contrast, I mean, my tasting notes around the Belching Beaver, Brewery Damned, were, I actually wrote down it was well-rounded. It was a little sweet, and my rating was a 4. So, but to defend, a bit of our conversation, that was almost nearly at the end.
Yeah.
For me. So I wonder if that was just palate fatigue that I was fighting through. So
yeah, it may be.
And I know that you actually pulled it out and tasted it as well. And I see you kind of nodding your head, going, "No, I'm sorry, Mike. It's
still not good."
Well, let's sing our conversation around kind of where is this style going. And so Julieanna alluded a little bit earlier to talking about where is this style going, and this was not a on par even footing blind tasting. First off, I know some things are changing in the definition of this, and I want you to talk about those changes as well as kind of charge into the question, where is this style going? Are we at the peak? Are we at the valley? Is this the middle of nowhere? Where is all this kind of going? Because I've definitely seen this style change dramatically over 3 years.
And I think it's going to continue to change, not only, based on what the great thing about craft beer is that it is ever changing, okay? And good brewers are trying to push the envelope on what a traditional style of a beer should be and what their interpretation of that is, okay? And we're seeing that now with IPAs. Just about a month ago, we had the national conference, the national convention.
Homebrewers Conference.
Right, exactly. And so the BJCP is what myself and Dave and Mark kind of live by in terms of our brewing styles when we brew our own beer as home brewers. Those style guidelines are going to change. And so the IPA is not your traditional IPA anymore. Now, it is still, for those of you that understand the BJCP, category 21 is the IPAs, and we're all familiar with that.
Yeah.
So 21A.
I think about it every morning.
Sure, of course
What
you
I
do.
talk about when I get up.
Section 21.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, and 21A is the American IPA. But now we've introduced this specialty IPA that has gone crazy. So the BJCP has now distinguished that it's not just a regular IPA anymore. The specialty IPAs are now going to be black IPAs and brown IPAs and white IPAs and rye IPAs and Belgian IPAs and red IPAs before you get to this strong American ales.
Well, what's cool, because what used to happen for homebrewers entering competitions is that if you did anything as an IPA, like if you brewed an IPA and you put Belgian yeast into it, or you brewed an IPA and you added some rye malt or some wheat malt or anything like that, you had to enter it into 23A, I believe, which is specialty beers. So 23A ended up being this big, weird
conundrum.
It could be 100 different things. It could be a porter with Belgian yeast versus a stout that you added rye malt into versus an IPA with tuna fish in it or something. Just weird, something weird, crazy thing.
Trout.
Oh yeah, well we did have a smoked trout beer in the last
That's
thing.
pretty wild.
So anyways, but yeah.
I've decided to lobby for a blue IPA
Okay.
because it's missing in the scheme of things. We can have a white IPA, we can have a red IPA. I want a blue IPA.
Okay, so would that be a blue, an IPA with blue
I don't
corn?
care. I just
blue
blue Caraco or
blueberries.
Blueberries. There you go, blueberry IPA.
Nice.
If all of a sudden that we are dropping down into color variations, out of this category, I'm not really sure what would be so different about a red IPA than a normal IPA. White IPAs I get. I don't know that I really agree with that, the delineation, between them all. I mean, my first reaction is, I think that will help beer competitions grow.
Yeah.
But I don't think that will help the commercial categorization of this style of beer do better. I don't think it's going to help the consumer because, I can see myself sitting down and talking to a relative going, look, the difference between a red IPA and a white IPA are the following items. And quoting from section 21/A, paragraph 42, says that is supposed to be a lot better beer because that is a white IPA.
But let me tell you why you're wrong. Actually, it's not really even what it really.
Yeah, recognize rebuttal argument for good old boy Dave.
That's right. It's about Paps. It's all about Paps. Now, really, what it's about is, the craft brewers, the professional brewers, are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to call it what they're going to call it, and it doesn't matter to them. Where this whole BJCP thing comes into play for us homebrewers is that, let's say Mark goes to Austin, Texas, and he tastes a weird red IPA that he loves, right? He wants to make a clone of it. He makes one. He wants to enter it into a competition, and it turns out to be mauve. Okay, so he doesn't know where, what category to enter it in. Previously, your options for an IPA were American IPA, English IPA, or double IPA, or specialty beer. So now, if he makes a session strength red IPA, he can enter that into a competition under those strict guidelines, and that's how he's judged. So it has nothing to do with commercial brewers.
My head is spinning. I got lost about 2 minutes ago.
I can say that I've been brewing and competing long enough to where I remember when with the BJCP when the Imperial IPA became a distinct category.
Yeah.
That oftentimes those of us who were competing with high gravity beers that were fairly highly hopped would sort of hedge our bets.
You'd enter both
and enter into the American Imperial IPA and the American barley wine.
Yeah.
Because at that particular time in history, the differences between those two were negligible. Now, I would say the qualitative difference between those two styles essentially is that American barley wines are highly hopped, but they are more heavily loaded in the grist with caramel. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I would say to really have a distinctive American double or imperial IPA, it needs to have very little crystal malt.
A lot of base
malt, and I would say even rye. And I even, we just mentioned the white IPA. I would say that the American double IPA needs to go in the direction of less crystal and lighter in color, because that's where you get the pop of the hop.
Yeah. Yeah, the two-row and maybe some white
Looks
wheat.
like something on the side of a can.
Pop of the hop. It sounds like a dance show from the 50s.
Yeah. So, and those are my preferences, just not only for brewing, but just for my own personal consuming. That
I agree.
If I want something that's really big and hoppy, and and on the dry side, I think it needs to be also more on the dry side.
Hoppy beers need to have a thin body.
Yeah.
Because if you're having to make the hops compete with caramel, unfermented sugars,
right?
That's where your problems come in, because you don't want a big, hoppy, chewy beer. You want a refreshing, dry, hoppy beer that's a thin malt body where the hops can shine on top of it.
And I think that rye is good to use also, because it adds to the dryness. So what I would recommend to our hobby brewers out there is to, if there's nothing wrong with the caramel color, but just use a very, very small percentage, maybe say 4% of your grist of crystal at like 120 Lovabond.
120, yeah.
Just a really high, kiln.
To get the max color.
Just to get the maximum color, but the least bit of flavor.
Yep.
That's what I would recommend.
Then throw a little rye in there, too.
So I have a quick 2-minute question. So if you had to describe where this style is currently today, peak, valley, or in the middle, what would you pick?
I'd say it's still in the middle. It's getting ready to peak. I think we can only take so much.
Juliana.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, there's a little bit of leeway to go, but at some point we're going to max out, because there's only so much you can do with this profile.
Yeah. Good old boy Dave.
Kind of what they're saying, but I think we have a lot farther to go before we max out. I think with what's going on with yeast these days, local yeast, sours, and different things, I think combinations are going to enable us to really go in a lot more different directions even than we're going now.
Did he say peak, middle, or I don't think so.
I said kind of middle, but low middle, not, they're like here middle, like waist level. I'm like at mid thigh.
Group therapy on Thursdays for you.
I guess so, really.
All right.
I think what's in question, though, are the base styles that we're referencing all these new styles over against, and we're actually sort of
redefining as you're going along.
Yeah, I think even the base styles that we're trying to reference everything to are becoming very blurry and fading from our memory.
Yep.
So that's the big question.
Well, with that, I'll offer my opinion on the question, which is, I would say we're at the peak, or actually I would say a little bit beyond peak. And I think part of it is that my observation is that I'm looking at what people are doing with the ingredients and how they're approaching the style, and I think that I look back at the last 2 years as the definition of the hop bomb, and thinking that there is no such thing as adding too much hops. And I think that what people are realizing is that does not work in terms of defining flavor. But at the same time, I think that brewers are recognizing that there are a lot of really great commercial examples that are out there, and they can approach this style with a lot of examples that are before them. So I just don't see the measure of innovation here that I would have, say, 3 or 4 years ago. That's not to say that it's not out there. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just that when I look at the scheme of things, have you figured out 80 or 90% of what the style is going to offer up with the base of ingredients you'd have to do? And I'd have to say yes. So I think it's still out there. Our discussion today was very interesting to pick up the question, which is, where is Double IPA and Imperial IPA in the U.S. craft beer market? Parting thoughts from Reverend Mark, looking back at everything you got to taste today. I mean, what did you think? What did you learn? What are you walking away with?
Well, what I'm walking away with are the stellar examples of these styles of the Imperial and Double IPAs. To me, the ones that really stood out were on the dry side. It's interesting that most of them were canned, which means there was less, they weren't permeable to light. And I think that when we're talking about this style, it's also a very fragile, kind of vulnerable product, more so than beers that are more on the malty end. Mm. So, my takeaway is that these kind of beers, even though they're high gravity and they should be able to have longer shelf life, are going to have to be products that has a pretty, rapid turnover to get them at their very best, because I think they're going to peak out fast.
Yeah. Julieanna, parting thoughts after a good day of tasting these 23 beers.
I think that it's all a matter of the perception of the person that's drinking them. I mean, some people enjoy more resiny flavors, some people enjoy more citrus flavors, and some people like a balance. So I think in terms of Double and Imperial IPAs, there is something for everybody. It's just a matter of knowing what your taste profile is, what you enjoy, and there is definitely something out there for everybody.
Yeah. Most definitely. Dave, parting thoughts on the day.
I think that you need to get out there and avoid packaging and just find a beer that you like. Ignore what the 3 experienced beer drinkers sitting at the table with you think. Love the beer that you love, and just, go by taste and not by what's currently on Rate Beer.
Yep.
Well, that is, it seems like every time we have done a blind tasting, I feel incredibly humbled by that experience. And Dave, you're really right on the same, comment that I have as, a parting thought looking back at the day, which is I'm really grateful for, I guess the first thing is, what an incredible base of products to pick from. Yeah. And just the level of quality of beer making right now is just phenomenal right now in the U.S. And so even though we picked a lot of winners and losers in our conversation, I don't know, there's some measure of pride and affinity thinking how well this style is being served currently in the U.S. craft beer market. Even if I still think we're kind of beyond the peak of that, I still look at the base of even the things that are in front of me, and I'm still thinking about another 50 beers that are not even on the list in front of us that are saying, you know what, this style is alive and well and doing very, very well. At the same time, I'm with Dave. Don't sit down and let some marketing person define what you like. And if you're going to sit down and spend that much time and money, enjoying something, why not sit down and actually decide for yourself exactly what it is that you like? Very humbling experience. I don't think there are several beers that I know that all of us named today that I would go, if I were sitting at the bar, there's no way on the free planet I would have picked that. But at the same time, I'm very proud of the fact that I let my palate do the walking today and let that be my ultimate guide, because that's really what it matters at the end of the day is, do you like what you're tasting? So that's definitely a lesson to be learned. So thank you all for listening to both these episodes today. It was an enjoyable experience. I know every time we go through one of these style shows, we always walk away with, wow, I look forward to the next one. And I do. I wonder what that will be. Since we've gone through so many of these now, I'm sure we'll have some other good style show ahead of us. I want to thank all of our listeners here on Sip, Suds, and Smokes. You can catch all of our episodes online on iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, Uncle John's Basement. He's standing there with a giant, keg of double IPA going, yeah, they're about done talking.
Hey, boy, get out of my basement.
And Spreaker, our native media host. Our terrestrial radio stations are questioning every single time they step out to the copier, going, why do we pay these guys anything? They're always expanding as well, and if you'd like to hear this particular show on your favorite radio station, why don't you send them a note and copy us as well? You can reach us online anytime at info@sipsudsandsmokes.com. Our daily tasting notes flow out on Twitter every single day at Sip, Subs, and Smokes. Our Facebook page is always buzzing with lots of news. And one thing I always forget to mention is nearly all of us are on Untapped. All of our hosts on Suds episodes are on Untapped, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us a line on Untapped as well. You can definitely catch our show, Sip, Suds, and Smokes, right directly on Untapped, as well as directly connect with a lot of our hosts on Untapped as well. Listen, do us a favor. If you're listening to this show online, rate this episode. That really is a big help to us, and we actually get to see your feedback as well. Most of all, I want to thank my co-host for joining me for this great experience today. Reverend Mark, thank you for joining us.
May the hops be with you.
Good old gal, Julieanna.
Hey, remember, craft beer is worth the effort.
And good old boy Dave.
Beer.
Such a great tagline. And this is good old boy Mike. Thank you once again for joining us. I'll ask you to join us once again and keep on sipping.
This has been a One Tan Hand production of Sip, Suds, and Smokes, a program devoted to the appreciation of some of the finer slices of life. From the Dude in the Basement Studios, your hosts, the good old boys, will see you all next time.